But first, we'll look at the implications of the 28 pages, those newly declassified documents, looking at Saudi government connections with the September 11th hijackers. Our guest for this segment of the show is John Gold, and here's Peter to introduce John.
John Gold has been an advocate for 9/11 justice for over 12 years. He's a member of the steering committee for the 911truth.org and helped found the site 911blogger.com. He's worked with different 9/11 family members for many years, and he helped with the film 9/11 Press for Truth. He has written several articles over the years having to do with 9/11 and authored a book called 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability. John, welcome.
Hi, Peter. How are you today?
Oh, it's cold and foggy up here, but we're glad to have you on. 14 years now. The 28 pages were censored, locked out from public viewing, and now that's come forward, and it's pretty clear that some Saudis had involvement in 9/11. What is the significance of the release of these pages?
Okay, well, what I'll do is I wrote down some notes, and I'll go through them because we don't have a lot of time. If JASTA passes, it will allow the 9/11 family members to take Saudi Arabia to court. If and when that happens, they could use the 28 pages as evidence. Personally, if they take Saudi Arabia to court, I would like to see people like Mike Jacobson, Raj Day, and Dana Leeseman called to testify about their experiences with Philip Zelikow during the 9/11 Commission, and then call Philip Zelikow himself to testify. I think that would be interesting, and just so everyone knows, they are the researchers from the 9/11 Commission that worked on the Saudi angle, and Philip Zelikow was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission. He was in charge of everything and made sure the 9/11 report did not mention Saudi support for the hijackers. Now, the pages have recently been released, but they still had redactions. Also, on top of the 28 redacted pages, just so everybody knows, there are many documents that still need to be released or unredacted. Right now, there's 80,000 documents pertaining to the Sarasota 9/11 incident that need to be released. Much of the documentation from the 9/11 Commission is yet to be released. Bush's presidential daily briefings, or PDBs, prior to 9/11, and a lot of the documentation from the 9/11 Commission have yet to be released. And many of the pages that were released from the 9/11 Commission have redactions with them as well. The 28 pages basically confirmed and expanded on what we've known for years. They confirmed that Princess Haifa, Prince Bandar's wife, sent money to Osama bin Laden's wife, but it expanded on that information by telling us that Bandar himself sent money directly to Osama bin Laden, a supposed Saudi asset. And the money sent supposedly went to help two of the hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi in San Diego. So think about that. The president's friend, otherwise known as Bandar Bush, I believe that is the big story, that Bush protected someone involved in the 9/11 attacks. You know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
John, this is Anthony Fest. Remind our listeners, please, what position Bandar held at that time.
He was the U.S. ambassador from Saudi Arabia. And I found an entry at historycommons.org that I think is interesting, and I don't think that's got much attention. The entry is called March 15th, 2001. Bush tells Saudi prince that military action in Iraq needs to be decisive. And during a meeting with President Bush, Saudi Prince Bandar expresses concern about the U.S.'s continuing patrolling of the no-fly zone in Iraq. The prince complains that it is, quote, costing us militarily, financially, but much more importantly, politically, end quote, and adds that, quote, it is not hurting Saddam Hussein, end quote. Bush seems to agree. quote, if there is any military action, then it has to be decisive that can finalize the issue, end quote, Bush says. And then, quote, the Iraqi opposition is useless and not effective, end quote. And that's from James Risen's book, State of War. So the president who wants to go to war with Iraq is talking about military action in Iraq with someone involved in 9/11 before 9/11. 9/11 was the event that enabled Bush to invade Iraq. I find that to be extremely suspicious, to say the least, especially when you take into account that during the time the 9/11 Commission was questioning Bush and Cheney behind closed doors, not under oath, with no transcripts. 9/11 Commissioner John Lehman asked him specifically about Bandar's connections to 9/11, and Bush, quote, dodged the questions, end quote. You know, if there's nothing to the allegations regarding Bandar and 9/11, then why did Bush feel the need to dodge the questions about it? Also, take into account that Bandar is familiar with how the terrorist system works. He was just responsible for sending in rebels into Syria. Rebels or terrorists, whatever you want to call them.
John, the three of the commissioners from the 9/11 Commission report, John Lehman, Bob Kerrey, and Tim Romer, have all acknowledged now that the Saudis were not adequately investigated by the 9/11 Commission. So this opens up a whole can of worms relative to 9/11 in that we don't have the full story yet, which what 9/11 truth people have been saying for 15 years now. And we've been, you and many others have just been asking for transparency and full investigation. And this seemed to have been blocked by Zelikow during the 9/11 Commission report.
Yep, absolutely. Philip Zelikow blocked half of the interview requests for Saudi investigators. He made it difficult for the Saudi investigators to gain access to the 20 redacted pages. That caused Dana Leeseman to go through a back channel to gain access to the 28 pages so she could do her job. And Philip Zelikow fired her for it. Philip Zelikow and Dieter Snell, who is someone else on the 9/11 Commission, they took part in a, quote, late-night editing session, end quote, to remove Saudi support from the 9/11 report against the wishes of the Saudi investigators from the 9/11 Commission. And they moved it into footnotes in the back of the book. There's something called an MFR from the 9/11 Commission, which is a memoranda for the record, and it basically explains what they talked about during their interview with a witness. And Prince Bandar's MFR from the 9/11 Commission is classified. How ridiculous is that?
So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia provided operational and financial support for the 9/11 hijackers, and essentially the 28 pages tells us that is what happened.
Yep. And, people point to the 9/11 Commission as having looked into this information, and they simply haven't. They released a document called Monograph for Terrorist Financing, and they address the issue concerning Princess Haifa, but they don't, and they said there's nothing to it, by the way, which is false. But they don't address the direct payment from Bandar to Osama bin Laden. So they pick and chose what they were going to address. How can you take a commission seriously that doesn't look at all of the information?
Absolutely.
Well, concluding thought, John, why do you suppose these particular 28 pages were released now, approximately coinciding with the two parties' conventions? Any connection there?
Well, I think the release of the pages during the conventions was meant to take away focus from the pages, but the release of the pages have been coming to a head for a long time now. Senator Bob Graham has been fighting for their release. The families have been fighting for their release. Over time, people like Stephen Lynch and Walter Jones and Thomas Massey jumped on the bandwagon to get the pages released. And, Obama promised on two separate occasions, two different family members, that he would have released the pages. So I guess he tried to stick to his promise, even though he took 8 years to do so. It's just been coming to a head, and I think they were finally released. I mean, 60 Minutes just had a segment on the 28 redacted pages, so that helped with the push for their release.
Do you think we can look forward to release of any more materials in the coming months?
I certainly hope so. There needs to be transparency concerning, 9/11, which was the murder of 2,976 people. It's absurd that anything has been held from the public.
Well, John Gold, thank you very much. You've been active on 9/11 research for many, many years now, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time to be on the Project Censored show with us.
All right, thank you very much for having me on today, and I hope KPFA raises all the money it needs.